You've said that you're a vocal critic of data democratization.
There's this sort of implicit assumption when you talk about data democratization that the data itself has good integrity, that it's clear. And if only people had access to it, then we'd all make better decisions and we'd see the world the same way. But people have different levels of sophistication with respect to data, interpreting data. People bring their own kind of hypotheses and they're just looking for the data to confirm what they already believe. Data can be extremely powerful, but you have to have a certain level of skill and training and contextual knowledge to interpret the data in a responsible way.
What's up, everyone? Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Joshua Kanter, co-founder and chief data and analytics officer at ConvertML. Joshua is former principal at McKinsey, and he's a 4-time CMO, Caesars Entertainment, then PetSmart, then International Cruise acquired by Arrivia, and later Ancora. In this episode, we explore why data democratization is breaking more than it's fixing, how confirmation bias corrupts marketing decisions at scale, why you're thinking about statistical significance completely wrong, why B2B marketing tests should be loud, and how to future-proof your Martech career without burning out. All that and a bunch more stuff after a super quick word from two of our awesome partners. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Knack. I have the amazing pleasure of chatting with some of the greatest minds in marketing operations, but you'd be shocked at how many of them have the same issues when it comes to their campaign creation process. They're dealing with things like scaling, personalization, keeping assets on brand, render testing emails, working in rigid templates, and worst of all, having to hand code emails. But many of the leaders in the space are using Knack to eliminate these headaches. Knack is a no-code email and landing page creation platform that covers initial campaign requests right until the sync to your marketing automation platform. Knack improves the whole campaign creation process by bringing the building, optimization, testing, collaboration, and also translation functions all in a single spot. So you don't have to jump around and coordinate feedback between a bunch of different people or wait on developers for very simple edits. Because at the end of the day, marketing ops folks want to focus on process and efficiency. Marketers want to focus on creativity, and Knack makes sure you get both and then some. Check them out at knack.com, that's K-N-A-K, and tell them we sent you. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Census. You probably have, over 15 tools in your marketing tech stack, but how many of them have the full picture of your customer's journey? Census is the universal data layer in your stack. It unifies and cleans data from all your sources and makes it available for any app to use. Census makes it super easy to unify and standardize customer data, then enrich and enhance it, like running deduplication, cleaning, scoring, and routing workflows, and then sync and activate that data across all of your tools so you can actually do something with it. For marketers and data teams that work together to power big campaigns, it's so refreshing to work from a reliable source of truth. Don't just take my word for it though. Census is loved by awesome companies like HubSpot, Perplexity, Canva, Clay, Notion, and many more. Check them out at getcensus.com and tell them we sent you. Joshua, thanks so much for your time today. Really pumped to chat.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
There's a bunch of different angles we could have gone down for the episode today when we were doing the pre-interview questions for our chat today. We landed on one that I think has a lot of different jumping off points, in this idea that like data democratization might be overrated was really interesting to me. Some folks call it like making data accessible to anyone in your company. It's this idea is really flashy, and it feels like something most companies try to achieve. I actually spent like 4 years at a BI startup early in my career, and it was part of our mission statement, like democratizing data for everyone in your company, give everyone access to like dashboards and data. But there's a dark side to giving non-data literate or non-technical users access to data. Just because more people can see the data doesn't mean they know how to interpret it. So yeah, you've said that you're a vocal critic of data democratization. Where does this belief come from, and what problems do you think it's causing inside of orgs today?
I should start out by saying that I'm not really some like evil, like anti-democratic, I do actually believe in the ideal of data democratization. I think it's a great idea. I also believe after 25 years of doing this stuff, and my first job, by the way, was out of college, I was a SQL jock, writing, database, queries 16 hours a day. So After a long career working closely with or in data, I've just found that, the pitfalls are so numerous and so subtle that people just like, they fall into them all the time. And they, figuratively speaking, they hurt themselves or the organizations that they're working on behalf of, because they just don't understand the data itself, the raw data, the underlying data. So the idea, there's this sort of implicit assumption when you talk about data democratization that the data itself is has good integrity, that it's clear, and if only people could like engage with it, if they only had access to it, then we'd all make better decisions and we'd see the world the same way. And I- I'm in for kumbaya, but I also know from experience that's not how it plays out.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, you can give people a crosstab of the same data, right? Just like pick two dimensions, put a fact in the crosstab, give people the spreadsheet and ask them to tell you what it means. And if you ask five people, you're going to get five different answers about that. Now that's mostly a function of, and that's not even like figuring out what the queries are. The query's already been like executed, the data's already been sourced, it's already been presented. But people have different levels of sophistication with respect to data, interpreting data. They bring their own hypotheses. Very often, what I have observed, what I've seen is that, and this comes from a dozen plus years of being a consultant, people bring their own kind of hypotheses and they're just looking for the data to confirm what they already believe.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not really an endeavor of discovery or interrogating the data or really truly understanding what the data says. And by the way, not nobody, too few people want to acknowledge that data has limitations. There's some data that we simply don't have. There's you can interpret the data and extrapolate or interpolate within certain boundary conditions, but then beyond that, you're getting a little bit out over your skis. And so, you know, I guess what I'm saying is, um, data can be extremely powerful, but you have to have a certain level of skill and training and contextual knowledge to interpret the data in a responsible way. And ultimately, that's what I want. And yes, I want everyone to do that. I do. So back to this democracy, I would love everyone to do that, but I also know that it's just not the way that it plays out. Even
Yeah.
people who have data related roles all too often ignore, sort of the gaps in the data, or they only look for confirmation of what they believe. They don't look for, information that might, support a different hypothesis, or they just, misinterpret stuff, which can happen. So anyway, I mean, I think you nailed it. And even in your articulation of the question, it's a great ideal. But in practice, it's very rarely lives up to the hype.
Yeah, it's a bit utopian for sure. I feel like your take is less cynical and more realist, and it's based in experience. And I totally relate with this idea of like the confirmation bias when it comes to diving into data and having like using data to reinforce what you already believe instead of analyzing data to find something new, discover new insights, and bring that to other people. We often go searching for evidence to support assumptions that we already have to back up like our existing thinking. And like you said, that could be really dangerous. How do you see this playing out day to day in marketing orgs? Like what role should marketing ops or just like data operations teams play in protecting the org from this happening? Like, is it a gatekeeping thing? Is it education? Is it guardrails? Kind of all of the above? What are
I
your
mean,
thoughts
look, my
there?
opinion is that sort of for organizations that have some scale, what I'm about to say will not apply to companies that have like, there's like one person who like works in the data and, so not for like super small kind of organizations, but organizations that have real infrastructure. You should have, what some companies call the data steward, right? So people who understand the data and are responsible for it. And when a business leader has a question, they should send the question to the person who understands the data to then translate the question in English into SQL, let's just say, right? Or whatever OLAP tool they're using, whatever kind of BI tool they're using, they'll understand the question and the business intent of the question, find the best way to kind of dimensionalize it with existing data, and then come back with both a data exhibit, right? That tries to, approximates a direct answer to the question, but then also some interpretation that says, look, this is what I see. Be aware that, the reason it doesn't go beyond this is that we didn't capture whatever. And, so here's what I think the answer to your question is, supported by these data with the following caveats, right? And you'll get an answer like that. Now, not all business people like that answer. Some people just want, give me the number, tell me yes, or whatever. And that's a maturity. Some people don't have a tolerance for, or have a low tolerance for uncertainty. And they want the database to give them every answer. I do think there's like a continuum of people's attitudes or their relationship with data. There are some people who believe very strongly in their own instincts, and the data that they want to validate their instincts with the data. And that leads to this confirmation, sort of phenomenon that we're talking. On the other extreme, there's people who are big believers, or they're almost evangelical about we're going to test everything and we're going to do experiments and we're going to gather all the data and the data will tell us, right? And there's that other extreme where it's almost like there's no intuitive value, right? We're going to let the data guide us. And then they won't be able to make a decision until they have not just every cell in the experiment populated with, n equals 200 or whatever. By the way, central limit theorem says you only need 30 n in any given cell. But the point is that they will just gather data. I took one of my years ago, I worked at a $7 billion retailer as the CMO, and I came in and, the head of merchandising, who left right around the same time I came. I didn't really work with the guy, but he used to commission research, and he would do 9,000 respondents in his research. And the reason that he would do that was he wanted to be able to do crosstabs of any given cell of anything that he could dream up later and have statistically significant results, because, and this is again, the guy on the other end of the spectrum, he just didn't, his relationship with data was not one where he could make an assertion that was kind of supported by the data. Right. So I think you see this continuum. You got some people who give this superficial nod to the data by double checking that what they were already going to do is somewhat supported by the data. And then you got other people who can't make a decision. They're paralyzed until the data tells them what to do.
Yeah.
And I don't think either of those is the right, place. I mean, I think where you want to end up is you recognize the data as a tool, right? It has certain kinds of uses. And by the way, analytics and analytical methodologies are also tools that you apply to the data. And so you have a toolbox of things, and you work with imperfect data. You work with somewhat dirty data. You make the best assumptions you can based on your experience and the data, right? And you try to make good decisions using the data. But all of those tools, knowing how to use them, and the limitations of your own data, those all require a level of sophistication on the part of the user. And so that ultimately what I'm saying is, data is super important. Strategically, it makes the difference between, sort of mediocre results and extraordinary results. When I was working in the casino industry before the retailer, there was a quote. It was the Wall Street Journal wrote, they took a quote that I had given in a speech, and it was a bold assertion I made. What I basically said was that the ways that the sophistication and use of customer data was more valuable than a gaming license. And you have to understand, in the gaming industry, the casino entertainment industry, gaming licenses are they could cost you $500 million or $1 billion. So for me to go out there and say that, the skill set around enterprise mastery of data was more valuable, I was making quite a statement, and I didn't intend to make the waves that I need with that statement in the speech that I gave, but it got quoted, and I got a couple of phone calls after that. But I still, I stand by it. I stood by it then, and I stand by it now. You know, the skill set and tool set and sophistication that organizations have around making strategic and intelligent use of their data is the difference between kind of just chugging along and and leading your industry.
Yeah, such a great answer. It's always a tough balance, like between smart rigor and like that unnecessarily delay that comes with a lot of experimentation and getting that big stat sig number. I think you actually said this in our pre-interview chat, like people not really appreciating the significance of statistical significance,
That's
always
true.
overdoing it.
People, yeah, I
But
mean, right. Yeah, I hate being punny on a digital format like this, but no, I mean, it's true. I don't think people really understand what statistical significance is. For
yeah.
example, if something is significant at the 0.05 or 95% confidence like level, what that means is one time out of 20, you'll be wrong, right? I mean, it's not like a perfect thing. What it means is data like this will show up erroneously one time out of 20. Are you comfortable with that? And at the 80% level, it'll show up one time out of 5. Well, you'll get the wrong answer. There's a statistician called Bonferroni, Italian statistician from, God, I don't know when, 1600s or hundreds. By the way, somebody's going to fact check us, and I'm going to be off by several hundred years. But anyway, Bonferroni introduced this notion that you can't do your analysis. You can't do your experiment and then go looking for your hypotheses after you've done your analysis. You have to have your hypotheses up front, because if you're looking for patterns in the data and then you go cherry pick, you are going to draw conclusions aren't truly as strong as you believe. And so he's got this adjustment that I'm not going to bore your listeners with. It basically says you have to actually cut your statistical significance based on having your hypotheses a priori. But back to what I was saying about the significance of significance. There's 3 ways to be statistically significant, right? The way that everybody thinks about is effect size, meaning you're comparing 2 things, and one of them, the metric you care about is like way up here, and the other one is way down here, and that's statistically different. That's the one that everybody thinks about. That's effect size, right? But with a very small effect size, you can also be statistically significant if you have enough sample size.
Mhm.
So, for example, they discovered in the 50s or 60s or something like that, that aspirin reduces the rate of, heart attacks, right? You had to take like half an aspirin or low dose of aspirin. The effect size there is really small. But when you're dealing with life and death, really small counts for a lot, right? So if you do a study and you have 10,000 people and you're comparing, some of them got the aspirin, some of them didn't, and then there's a natural heart attack rate, and then you've cut that by 4%, or, I mean, I don't know what the effect, it wasn't big. And in fact, with a small sample, you wouldn't be able to know. The variance would be too noisy to be able to even measure a
Yeah.
4% impact, or whatever the effect size was. But with a large sample size, which is what they had, they were able to confirm with statistical significance, you know what? This actually makes a difference. And when you're dealing with life and death, that's really important. And that's one of the things that now is part of, medical science has accepted this and people understand it. And it's a really important life and death tool. So that's the second way, right? So the first way is effect size. That's what everybody thinks about. Sample size, you can take a small effect size, you can get to statistically significant results if you have a large enough sample, because that reduces your standard deviation, which means your variance is. And so then you can measure, you can discern 2 things being different, even if they're very similar averages, because your sample size is so big and your standard deviation is so small. The third way is sort of cheating, but for completeness, I'll mention it, which is that you can reduce your threshold for what you call significant, right? So a lot of people use alpha as 0.05, meaning that, it has to be, 1 in 20 chance of it being wrong or less. but you could also have alpha as 0.10 or 0.20 or 0.25. You move the goalpost.
Mhm.
Again, it's sort of cheating, but there are times when, it should be 0.01,
Mhm.
right? I mean, where you really need a high bar. Medical science would be a good example of that. And then there are times when it really doesn't matter that much, right? You're testing copy in a marketing communication, and, indicatively, you want to have some idea about what the right answer is. You can just look at the averages, and that'll give you some idea. But if you have different sample sizes, you want to compare these things, and you want to know, hey, what's the chance this one is in fact better than that one? Well, you can calculate it, and you can decide this is significant or this is not significant, but you have a yardstick that you've defined. Standardly, people use 0.05, but that's not universally the only option to use. So anyway, yes, statistical significance is something that's probably way more than your listeners care about, but I use it to illustrate that people are banding about terms and phrases that they don't deeply understand. They believe that significance is important. Some of them believe that if it doesn't achieve the statistical significance threshold, that the finding is not meaningful, which
Mm.
isn't necessarily true, right? So anyway, I'm just saying that there's sophistication here, and the important thing is to pair good business judgment with a solid understanding of the data. And if those two things don't happen to reside in the same human brain, that's okay. That's all right, you know? And so my general philosophy is you want to have, business people who can ask, important questions, and then people who understand the data who can provide meaningful answers.
Do you think it's fair to say that instead of testing minor changes where that detectable effect might be very small, teams, maybe especially in B2B, should be trying bold marketing experiments to create unmistakable detectable effects? And how do we operationalize that? Like, do we choose three consistent metrics that align with business objectives and we track them across longer horizon terms? Like, what are
Yeah.
your thoughts there?
Yeah. I mean, look, I spent maybe of my career gets longer every day. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I'm getting older apparently, but I've been doing this since the 90s. And so it's a long time. And first 20 years, I worked almost exclusively in B2C. But the last 5 years I've worked in B2B, and there are some structural differences that
Mhm.
really show up in the data. When you like, I ran in the casino industry, I ran a loyalty program that had uh, 30 million members or something. And then when I was in retail, the loyalty program there was like 50 million. I mean, it was just like, so and then in B2B, it's like you're, you're in a certain sector and you're we were talking to CTOs or CIOs. And so, how many of those are there? 10,000, for companies above $1 billion in revenue or what? I mean, like, it's just a fundamentally different scale. And so you can do a lot more robust analysis and experimentation and those sorts of things in B2C. You can run a test with 100,000 people in condition A and 100,000 people in condition B, right? And you can get your answer really fast. But you can't afford to do that in B2B because A, you'll run out of sample, and B, you've only got one shot for
Yeah.
certain like companies. And so, so the ways that you learn have to be different in B2B versus B2C. And I mean, I could go into more depth, but at a high level, you can't, there's a lot more sophistication on the B2C side, which is where I come from. But I've also spent the last 5 years working in B2B. And I think that back to what you said, you can only measure, uh, and when I say measure, I'm talking about like legit, like data in the database kind of, you can only measure and quantify the difference if you have a strong effect size, meaning strategy A works better than strategy B, which is better than strategy C. You can only quantify that if you have fundamentally different um, and differently effective strategies. And you can't get into a lot of the nuance. In B2C, you have an experiment, you might have like 5 different factors, and each factor might have 3 levels. And let me explain what those terms mean. Like, if you have a marketing communication, there's let's say it's an email. There's the subject line. That's one factor. You might have 3 different versions. Those are 3 different levels, right? So you got one factor with 3 levels. Then you've got, like, let's say you've got an offer and it's 10% off or 30% off or 50% off. Those are like very different. Usually that's a broader range than you would typically put in one experiment, but you get another factor, 3 different levels. Then you've got are you going to have embedded video or images or text? That's another factor. Then there's like, what's the major positioning or the message that, and one is about, we're your trusted provider. And the other one is, this is the cheapest thing you've ever seen. And the other is, don't risk it with people who, I don't know, whatever, right? You got like the kind of the thrust of the pitch you're making. So you can have these various factors and you can test different levels. And so then if you were to combine all of those together, you've got, let's say, 5 factors, each of them with 3 levels. I'm not going to do the math now, but that's, 3 to the 5th, right? It's a big number of possible. So the full factorial, if you were to do this full experiment, is going to be, several thousand cells, whatever the number is. You can't do that in B2B. You can do that in B2C, although most people don't do it that way. Doing that would be a full factorial experiment, and you don't need to. You can be a lot more efficient through methods that are like a fractional factorial design. I don't think your audience cares to hear about experimental design, but there are ways to be much more efficient in your experimentation, where instead of doing all, let's say, 2,000 combinations, you just do, 50 combinations. But then, because of where they're chosen in the n-dimensional space, you can interpolate to simulate any one of the 2,000 things. And you can build a simulation tool that allows you to say, like, okay, well, for this segment, if I had it like this, what would I expect the results to look like? Now we're getting into, this is fancy stuff you can do with math. But by the way, don't try putting this in the hands of your CMO and ask them to like just come up with it on their own, or their product owner. Like, this is sophisticated stuff that requires experts who understand the data, the methodologies, the tools, etc.
This episode is brought to you by Revenue Hero. You've invested thousands in your marketing funnel, targeted the right ICP, spent weeks A/B testing, and optimized for conversion at every step. Finally, a high-intent prospect fills out your demo form, and then nothing. Your nurtured lead sits in a queue while you chase them with, "How's Thursday at 2 p.m.? Meanwhile, your competitor is already on a discovery call. That's not just frustrating, that's revenue walking away. With Revenue Hero, you can qualify, route, and book leads with the right rep, so your team can start real conversations right away. For the ops folks listening, Revenue Hero syncs meeting data to your CRM. Auto credits no-shows, recalibrates when reps go on vacation, and has a ton of smart features you won't find anywhere else. If you're spending to drive demand, don't lose it at the last mile. Visit revenuehero.io/demo today.
This episode is brought to you by MoEngage and their new Warehouse Native CEP, which revolutionizes the way data should be seamlessly fetched, analyzed, and activated. Now you can use MoEngage Cloud Data Sync to sync your warehouse data with MoEngage and use it to segment audiences or personalize messages without any development. Just set and forget. Use MoEngage warehouse segments to create segments on your warehouse data without moving underlying events, properties, or proprietary segmentation logic, and activate them directly on MoEngage. Using warehouse data analytics, brands can also directly generate insights from their warehouse data. Your long search solution for seamless data sync, smarter segmentation, dynamic personalization, and delightful customer experiences ends here. Warehouse Native CEP from MoEngage, making it easy, smart, and secure. Learn more at moengage.com. It's really cool to hear you talk about some of those technical data aspect things, because the traditional assumption is that the average CMO isn't technically savvy or data savvy. Like we talk to a lot of attribution measurement vendors and they sell into CMOs and CFOs, and it's like two very different conversations. You're a 3-time CMO and you're talking about experimentation design. I don't think that qualifies as like your average CMO background there. Maybe chat about like how that has like shaped your experience and your background now going back to the entrepreneurial world. You're a co-founder at ConvertML. Like obviously that helped shape that decision. Maybe chat about that a bit.
Sure. Yeah. Look, I mean, I think it's true that not every CMO has an affinity for the data side of things. I would say, if you oversimplify marketing as a discipline, there's sort of like brand marketing on the one end, and then data-driven marketing or performance marketing on the other end, right? And you can exist anywhere on the continuum. And I think by nature and by training, I'm sort of personally more maybe 2/3 on the end of the spectrum towards the data and performance marketing. But I've spent 15 years or so trying to really develop skill and mastery on the brand side as well. And I think I'm fairly balanced. But there are some marketers who are just like they're a brand person, and for some businesses, that's really the thing that they need most. Um, I do happen to believe, though, for the kind of businesses that I work in, I think that the strategic role of a marketing leader requires fluency in data and in technology. Um, we don't, it's not Mad Men anymore,
No.
and I'm not trying to disparage brand marketers. I'm just saying like, there was a time when that was the totality of marketing. And now, in the age of digital marketing, and, user generated content and, social media, and connected devices. And I mean, the things that you can do as a marketer have exponentially exploded. And I think you have to keep your finger on the pulse. You don't have to be a master of everything, but you've got to understand modern technology and you've got to have some level of understanding of data, because those new technology touch points not only give you new ways to engage with your end customer or your prospective customers, which is very exciting for anybody who tries to drive the top line of a business, but it also creates data, right? Which gives you insight. So not only does it give you reach and access, but it also gives you insight. And so it's really the combination of those things that's so important. Now you mentioned ConvertML, and yeah, I'm really excited to be a co-founder of ConvertML. It's a business that was born about a year and a half ago. My co-founder and I got together, we met, and we were talking about how do you give people access. This is now, it may sound like it's in conflict with what we've just been talking about, but how do you give people access to advanced statistical methods in a way that doesn't make them vulnerable to misinterpreting the data? How do you kind of give them safe, reliable access to advanced statistical methods? And what we found is that we can, one can, and we are at ConvertML, making use of generative AI. Generative AI was, before it existed, in order to get access to these advanced statistical methods, you needed to hire a data scientist or a PhD or somebody who like deeply understood that stuff. I don't have a PhD. I do understand more than most marketers need to. I understand data and advanced, data science methods, but you had to have somebody with that level of depth to really use the data and get that kind of insight out of the data, right? And we could talk about the difference between like reporting and analytics, because most people just do crosstabs. That's just reporting, whereas they don't use any statistics because they haven't understood, when they apply and how to interpret them and, which ones to use where. And so the idea was, so then pre-pandemic, pre-generative AI, you need a statistics expert to then apply those methods to your data. Then generative AI happened. And generative AI is fascinating because it has the ability to emulate the sort of human interpretive function that gets applied. I mean, there's like art and science in a lot of this stuff. When you're interpreting the data, there's some cognitive, intuitive leaps you have to make to see patterns and then call them out and say, well, what does this actually mean? And humans do that. They do it with varying degrees of, reliability and insight, but they do it. And generative AI, if it's prompted correctly or intelligently, can also do a reliably good job there. So it's really the combination. What we've done with ConvertML is we've said, look, we understand these advanced methods that require expertise. And what we can do is we can program into a generative AI engine knowledge about which methods to use in which circumstances. When the data has these characteristics, use this method. When it has this characteristic, use this method. And then it not only does the analysis, but then serves up a facts set and an interpretation of what it means. So it kind of closes the gap, and it gives you a reliable, extremely insightful view into your data without having to often hire a $300,000 a year data scientist, and without having to go back for your PhD in statistics, which some people will do, but it's not the path that everybody takes. And so that's really what ConvertML does. It harnesses the power of advanced analytical methods and generative AI, and through automation, combining these two things, you can put in the hands of average to advanced business users. You can put in the hands like a reliably powerful statistical analysis engine that'll tell them, hey, this matters. This doesn't matter so much, right? This is what you should go do next.
Very cool. So you're promoting data democratization, but in a safe, responsible way.
It's
tools.
Really that last bit, right? Exactly. Yeah. Because as I said earlier, I do believe in putting it in the hands of everybody. I just happen to believe that there are a lot of ways you can go wrong.
Yeah.
And statistics really helps, but the problem is there's this big barrier where like people don't want to go study statistics. They've got a business to run, right? And so giving them access to a tool that helps them to get the answers they need in a timely manner without all of the, hiring and management of data wonks, myself included, right? I say that affectionately, but you don't want to have to go do that for most businesses. And so, that's really where ConvertML is designed, to play. And, whether it's survey data, like market research type stuff and segmentation, or even asking questions like in English and getting answers, right? You can use generative AI now to ask a question in spoken English and you get an answer that's rooted in your data set. Well, that's powerful, right? And we have that in ConvertML. We're not the only ones. People have stuff like that, but it's really powerful. So the idea is to give people safe, reliable, insightful access to their own data. And so I mentioned that's surveys or direct access to like full database. Two different offerings, but same kind of tool set that you put on top.
So you mentioned GenAI a couple of times there, and like some of this I'm sure gets into like NLP2 when you're able to convert some of those questions into SQL prompts and interact with your data. But you talked about like a good prompt and focusing on like what is a good prompt, like in a world where GenAI is helping you interpret complex customer data, whether it's customer surveys or sitting on top of the warehouse. Like, what do you think makes a good prompt?
Yeah. Good question. First of all, you know what SQL stands for?
The structured query language.
Yes, that's right. Not everyone knows that. A lot of people think the S is standard. And the reason I ask the question is the English language doesn't have that very important structure that, I mean, like if someone says, how's my business doing? Like that's a question that somebody might ask, but it gives you none of the structure that you would need. If you were to try to turn that into SQL, good luck. Right. And so I think that, look, inside of ConvertML, what we've done is we have certain offerings that are well-structured analytical processes, right? There's 12 steps to the process. Step 1 is this, step 2 is this, step 3 is this. And a lot of those are just data operations that if you know what to do, it's actually pretty straightforward. But then you get to step, let's say 7 or 8. And at step 7 or 8, you actually have to look at the data and interpret the data. And you have to like name a segment or describe a segment or what, like you have to actually interpret it and say, what is it saying? And this is where historically like humans would go. But again, if this is something that generative AI does fairly well, if the prompt is well constructed. So what we've been doing at ConvertML is we've been combining kind of well-established, reliably good statistical operations with these prompts that take care of the human interpretation part, right? So there's automation of advanced statistics plus well-constructed, well-crafted prompts or well-engineered prompts that get you from the start of the process to the end. Now, that's part of the secret sauce and what's under the hood at ConvertML. But people don't need to use ConvertML. I mean, you can write your own prompts. The problem is the lack of structure in the English language. I mean, that's where I started my answer to your question. Because if people are just kind of writing their own questions, it's up to them to provide enough context and enough information for generative AI to have any idea what to do. And so, I think about generative AI as an extremely eager, but totally inexperienced new hire fresh out of college, right? They'll work all night long and they'll generate anything you ask, but they have no idea if it's right. They have no experience to build on, right?
Yeah.
So it's up to you as the person asking the question or assigning the task. It's up to you to give them the guardrails and to give them the guidance about, hey, this is the form I'm looking for. This is how to treat, null values, or this is how to, so unfortunately, maybe it's fortunately for some, but unfortunately for most average users, crafting a good data related prompt requires you to do the thinking. You have to have some real rigor around it. And it's more than I think we can ask of every user out there. People are going to ask unsophisticated questions, not like thumbing their nose at the world. They just don't have the experience or the technical skill to do it. And that's fine. But again, that's part of the reason why there's a gap in the world. There's a ConvertML shaped sort of void in the world. And that's what we're filling, right? By giving people kind of pre-built prompts that they can access in intuitive ways. And then all of the correct operations with well-engineered prompts that can support and give them meaningful output. But regular users can do it too. They just have to know what they're doing and they have to know how to use generative AI. Not everyone ticks both of those boxes.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny, like some folks on the show, when we talk about Gen AI, say that it's going to be like the rise of the generalists. And some folks kind of counter that and say that, especially in this data context, folks that are specialists, like really niche specialists in one area, will have more future-proofing potential because of Gen AI. And I don't know, like it makes me think of like this idea of like, instead of democratizing access to data, do you think we need to reevaluate the role of like data literate specialists in marketing roles or like marketing operations teams? Like what does this ideal team structure look like? Is there a central data team or a decentralized embedded analyst who is a specialist on each marketing team? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, no, those are good questions. I think, if I pull back a little bit and think about how enterprises or mid-sized organizations really extract value from generative AI, I don't think it's pixie dust. In other words, I don't think that you just keep your organization exactly the way it is and you give ChatGPT to like your marketers or your data people or whoever. I don't think that you keep everything the same and then give ChatGPT to individuals and magically expect your business to transform. I don't think that's how it works at all. In order to harness and extract the value, the promised value of generative AI, I think you need to take a look at the ways that you've been operating. What are the core processes in your business, right? I would hazard to assert that most businesses, their data architecture is the way it is because it's what serves the needs of the business users, the data consumers. And then your internal processes and even your organizational design is all a function of, oh, it takes this long to do these tasks. And in parallel, somebody else has to go and do these other tasks. And then you have these kind of general work. There's a map of like processes that your whole business uses. And the org is built up around that. And the infrastructure and the data architecture have all been built up around that template of how things get done. And the reality is, and this is scary for some and exciting for others, generative AI can now fundamentally disrupt those core processes. Not like throwing them out the window, but allowing you to take something that required 5 people in 3 weeks down to 90 minutes with one person and a laptop or whatever. And if that's the case, then you have to rethink your org structure. You have to rethink your data structure. You have to rethink, your overall infrastructure. You have to rethink a lot of things, and not just rethinking what you already do. You have to introduce some things you didn't used to have. The ethical use of AI is a new discipline. You have to protect your organization from hallucinations. You have to make sure that you're protecting your proprietary LLMs from prompt injection and other things. Like there's new information security disciplines that have to be brought to bear. So back to your question, like, how is generative AI going to change like the roles as a specialist and generalist? I don't know. And it probably varies by company. But what I'd say is if an organization is serious about capturing the value at an enterprise level, not at an individual level, not saying, oh, my data analysts can do 30% more work now. You can do that. Just give them ChatGPT. But if you want to transform your organization, you got to take a look at your end-to-end processes and rethink, how am I going to get that core process done? And do I have the right team structure? First of all, do I have the right process? You define the process first, and how much of that can and should be done through generative AI. What are the guardrails you need to put around it? What's the data you need to use to support it? Then after you have those things answered, then you start to look at what is the team structure and what are the roles? And you probably don't have as many boxes in that future state as you have today, probably. And your business can be fundamentally faster, but you've got different roles. Some of them are probably more specialized. Some of them, by the grace of God and ChatGPT, are going to be more generalized, right? And some of them don't exist today that are going to be necessary to protect the organization from the unknowns arising from this new operating model.
Super cool answer. I love it. And something I chat about a lot with listeners, like I ask a lot of new listeners, like, what is the one thing that keeps you up at night right now? Or like, what's one thing you really want to learn more about? And there's this like excitement, but also fear with Gen AI right now in Martech and marketing ops roles. A lot of folks are excited because they're experimenting and playing. But to your point, like a lot of businesses are seeing in a couple of years this future where they can cut 50% of the workforce by
And that's
implementing these
terrifying.
new tools.
That's
And it is
terrifying. I mean,
terrifying for a
it's
lot of folks.
terrifying. Maybe there's some, evil capitalist with a top hat and the money bags, and he's like laughing all the way to the bank. Maybe that person's excited. It is terrifying to think about, the world I just described needing fewer humans, right? I acknowledge that. I feel that deeply. Having said that, it's not like Skynet, right? It continues to be this like inexperienced, error prone, naive capability, and maybe it'll get better. It probably will, but you still need thoughtful humans to guide, interpret, and validate what is happening in the system. You're still going to need that. It is exciting. This is a transformative journey, and people who take the journey and the transformation seriously are going to be eminently employable. Not everyone is going to go along that journey, and I don't know how things play out, for people who are not participating in this journey. Uh, I I want to believe it's all going to be just fine, and so I'm going to just for today make that assumption. But I think um, look, it is scary, it is exciting. I don't think it's all dystopia, and I don't think it's all utopia. I think it's going to be a mixed bag, just like everything else in human history to date. But I do think that if you want to participate in the excitement, you're going to have to get scared and get involved and learn, get smart, right? So I think that's um, it's a choice. Some people are not into it and they're not going to do it. They're going to let somebody else figure it out, and that's fine. But I also think that the first movers are going to, it's higher risk and higher reward. And that's kind of where, you know, ConvertML is. We believe we're moving quickly in a space that is evolving and has a lot more evolution to go. Um, but and then there will be other companies that kind of sit back and wait and watch. Maybe large companies that gobble up smaller companies that take the risks and that prevent. And that's the way things work, and that's as it should be.
The cycle of consolidation and new startups.
Yeah, it totally happens, and yeah, but I do kind of I don't know how it's going to
Yeah.
play out for the business users, right? Um, I suppose if we had a time machine we go back 100 years, right, or 125, right, the Industrial Revolution, right, there were people whose job was to you know hammer this, you know, dowel into this wood thing where somebody else had drilled the hole and then they hammer the thing in, and you know those jobs don't exist anymore, right? Mm, and the jobs we have today they couldn't have possibly imagined, right? So I don't know what it's going to look like in, I would say, 125 years, but let's be honest, in 10 years I don't know what it's going to look like. um I do think that there will be a place for people who are serious about participating.
On this point about like being serious about participating, uh, give us like a practical example. That's like, what would you differently if you were starting, or maybe not restarting, but like, I don't know, 5, 10 years into your data career in today's Martech Gen AI landscape? What's one thing you encourage folks listening to be doing in terms of like taking this seriously?
um yeah, I think, let's see, when I graduated from college in the 90s, I had no interest in the business world. I had none. I could do math in my head. I got hired as a consultant and I ended up writing SQL code all day because I could do math. But I wasn't interested in the global economy. I didn't know the first thing about business. And so I started out, I was working in financial services. I started by reading the American Banker every day, which is pretty dry. And if you're not working in financial services, don't do it. Can't recommend it. But but I just started out by giving myself a little bit of a diet of something that wasn't interesting to me. It certainly wasn't interesting the way that Saturday morning cartoons were interesting to me when I was a teenager, um, or other things, right? But give yourself a little bit of a diet, or subscribe to a newsletter or a podcast or whatever. Listen to people who are like doing this for a living. I mean, it's actually way easier today to get a little bit of a taste here and there. Find something or two or three things that you're kind of interested in, and then give yourself a month or two. Don't set your target to be an expert, but like give yourself a personal assignment to learn about that thing. You don't know what a RAG is? Figure out what a RAG is. What's the difference between a RAG and an LLM? figure that out. You don't have to do that, but is set yourself, start by just giving yourself a diet of something that maybe isn't that interesting to you, but like you feel like is somewhat relevant, you know, and then get a little bit of exposure, figure out maybe there's some part of it you think is interesting, and then go from there and then start to explore. And what you'll find, or what I found for myself, is that the things that you initially start with are not the things that you're going to end up like. You're going to end up discovering something that you didn't know existed. And that's going to be really interesting to you. And then you can like lean into that, and maybe it'll shape the direction of your career if you're starting out, or frankly, even if you're not, even if you've been doing this for a while, you may discover something. I'm no longer executive in multi-billion dollar enterprises. Now I'm a co-founder in a small, data tech, Martech, you know, AI company. Right. And that's exciting. Right. But not everybody is into that. But I think if you are interested, don't try to, take it all in all at once. Find a couple of things, start doing some general research, subscribe to some things, listen to people, find people that you're interested in the way that they talk, the way they present things. This is a good one. But find people that you're interested in and learn from them, and then branch out from there and give yourself a little bit of, targets. Hey, by the end of the summer, I want to know what this thing is. I want to understand that generally. And if you do that for a little bit, you'll find some things that you didn't know existed that are really, really fascinating and are part of the emerging economy.
That's such great advice. Like the rabbit hole discoveries of self-based learning. Anyone who's curious about something has gone down that path, whether it's like on YouTube or some blog somewhere, and you discover new terms.
I've got two kids, right? One is a 4-year-old, and she's a Corona baby, and she's amazing, and I love every second of it. But I've also got a son who is 20. He just finished his sophomore year in college. And, it's kids go off to college these days, and they think they have to know their major and what their career is going to be before they even get there. And I've had to explain to my son, like, hey, take it easy. College is actually not about, I mean, it is about learning, but it's actually more about learning about yourself,
Mhm.
right? Try lots of things and discover what gets you excited. Right. And then let that guide you in your next decision, and then get your degree. And when you're done, the people who are going to hire you don't care if you got a degree in, you know, Spanish literature or art history or microeconomics. They don't care. They care that you're an interesting human who, is interested in the work, and, they want to interact with you, and you've a demonstrated history of setting targets for yourself and achieving them. Getting a college degree is that, right? So don't worry about being all over focused. And the point that I'm trying to make, to connect it back to the point we were just making, is by learning about all these things, yes, you're learning those things, but you're really learning about what makes you tick. And that's something that none of us are too old to do that. We all do that forever, or you can stop anytime you like, but then you just you're on pause for the rest of your life. Who wants that? Right. So continue to learn, continue to push, continue to ask questions, continue to find answers. And when you find those answers, it's about truth in the world, but it's also about truth inside of who you are.
Love it. I feel like this is the perfect segue to our last question. Joshua, you're a serial entrepreneur, 3-time CMO plus multiple time senior exec. You're also a husband. You just said a father of 2. One question we ask everyone on the show is, how do you remain happy and successful in your career? How do you find balance between all the stuff you're working on while staying happy?
That's a good question. Actually, there was an article just yesterday in the New York Times about happiness in American culture, and I won't ruin it for people who should go out and read it. Basically, the authors say that happiness in American culture has become very superficial relative to where the concept of happiness is hundreds of years old. It's not millennia old. It's younger than that. But they basically say that American culture has come to this sort of like fairly superficial, relatively speaking, more superficial concept of happiness today than it ever was. For me, it's more about fulfillment, and living, like a moral life, but also doing things that I find to be meaningful. And to me, that's about being a husband and a father. I love um, cooking and baking with my 4-year-old. Like there's like nothing better. And my wife accuses me of trying to, give her diabetes and, or, flaring up her gluten sensitivity. But I just, it's just something, it's the Jewish grandmother inside of me, I think, that just wants to feed people. That's an expression of love. But I think, spending time with loved ones, and doing something that's a shared experience. My 4-year-old and I this morning, after breakfast, but before school, we're doing a puzzle. And man, I- there's nothing better. It's not about the puzzle. It's not about the food. It's about spending time with people you love and, helping them to grow. And while you're doing that, doing a little bit of growing yourself.
Such a cool answer. It's funny, a lot of folks on the show are also founders or like they're starting something. And I can always tell a little bit when someone has kids and when someone doesn't. And the people who don't have kids like have 17 different hobbies going on. And the people with kids are just like, my hobby are my kids. Like I do
Yeah.
this and that with my kids.
I have to say, it's a lot more socially acceptable. The dad jokes are a lot more socially acceptable when you actually have kids. I think that humor has been part of my life since I was a kid. I get it from my dad, who gets it from his dad. But now that I have kids who are like, oh, it's just like, oh yeah, of course he's a dad. Yeah, my wife and I, we did pickleball the first time earlier, I guess last week. Super fun, by the way, and not. It's basically, I don't know if you've done it. It's
Never
like you take
tried
a
it. No.
racquetball racket and a wiffle ball, and then you go on a tennis court, and then there's a game. And it's, but it's fun and it's not intimidating, and you can do it if you're, a teenager, or you can do it if you're in your 70s. So, it's sort of, but you're right. I think you can get lazy. I don't mean that in a judgmental way. You can get it's easy to fill yourself up with just your family and your kids. But there's a whole world out there. And, so, travel and see it and experience it and pick up some things. I'm doing, tonight I've got a class at ASU. I'm in Arizona. So I'm going down to ASU. I'm taking a class on writing,
Hmm.
tonight, my class. So, you know, trying to branch out a little bit. But the core of it, to your question, is for me is family. But I think there's a whole world of possibilities out there for people who are paying attention.
Love it. Love your answer, Joshua. Yeah, plug ConvertML a little bit for folks that are curious to check it out. ConvertML.ai, right?
That's right. Yeah. ConvertML.ai. Look, we've been building, we're a young company. I think I explained kind of earlier the thesis of the company, is that, um, with the advent of generative AI, we have the ability to put in mere mortals' hands, like normal business people, we have the ability to put in their hands advanced statistical tools and methods, that don't require them to be experts, but also enable them to get, um, clear and meaningful, insights into their data, to run their business. So that's what we've been building. Product set continues to expand. We launched externally about 6 months ago. And yeah, it's an exciting time. And yeah, we hope people will be interested to check us out.
Awesome. I appreciate your time today. This is super fun conversation. I know some folks probably got some laughs like I did, but yeah, really appreciate the data driven scientific mind of a CMO on the podcast here. Thank you so much for your time, Joshua.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.